Welcome again in the world's smallest one-man bike paint studio. What I have here is an S-Works Shift time trial bike. It has a chip on the top tube, a little accident, and I'm here to show you how to remove the chip in factory new condition as it would never been happened, but only with spray cans and some simple tools. Simple and easy job, let's do it. And what I needed first is wet sander, my wet sanding bucket, and some wet sanding paper. This time I'm using 1200 grit, very important 1200 grit. And what I'm doing is a light sanding around the chip, 10 centimeter around the chip. I'm a metric guy, not an inch guy, so I can tell you only what it is in metric. So 10 centimeter around the chip, light sanding, that's what I'm doing. Let's start. The next thing we need is the primer, so I brought some primers with me which are available on the market, and there are two things to consider about the primer. The first one is I'm painting a black bike, so I'm using of course a black primer, and the second and very important thing is I highly recommend a two-component primer like the Spray Max. I know a lot of you want to go as cheap as possible and think these cans are much too expensive. Yes, you are right, these are expensive, but I highly recommend the two-component primer because they are much easier to use, they are high build, and your painter's life's much easier if you use professional stuff than the cheapest stuff. But if you want to go cheap, you can of course use a 1K primer, but please don't ask me what's best. The best is every time professional material. If you want to go super cheap, you can also use a piece of poop if you think. But if you want to go pro like I do, I highly recommend the two-component primer. Let's put it on the bike. And here you can see why I like to use a black primer. Can you see these white outlines around the chips? And guess what these are? It's a light gray primer underneath a black paint job. Super stupid. If you are a pro, you are using black primer underneath dark colors and light primers underneath light colors. And if there will be another chip, you won't see it that much, and you can make sure that the black covers perfect over a black primer. So black primers underneath dark colors, light primers underneath light colors. Here we have the spray can, and what we absolutely don't do if we have only small chips, never spray direct out of the spray can. That's a no-no, that's what we don't do. But what we are doing if you are pros, we buy a cheap airbrush like this for $15, not much, $15, and you have an airbrush and you are spraying out of the airbrush. So spray can color in the airbrush and the airbrush on the bike. Let's do it. It's 12 hours later and I'm again here with wet sander, my wet sanding bucket for another wet sanding session. And what we are doing is block sanding. What does that mean? I'm using a wooden block like this, and I wrap the wet sanding paper, again 1200 grit, around the wooden block to avoid any dents in the sanding surface. Don't sand with your palm or your fingers, you will sand dents in the surface. That's what we like to avoid, and that's exactly the reason why I use a wooden block. Wetten the wet sanding paper as every time and then do the block sanding. The next step is the color, so I brought some colors with me, and now listen carefully because that's very important. If you use a 2K primer with a hardener inside, you can use also a nitro color like this. NC formula, but if you use a 1K primer, an acrylic 1K primer, you should use an acrylic color as well. Never use nitro colors on 1K primers, that can be an absolutely nightmare. So make sure you know what you are doing. 2K primer, nitro color or acrylic color, 1K acrylic primer only acrylic color. And if you have an airbrush like I use, you can use, of course, also these airbrush acrylic colors. That's what I'm using, the Createx. And if you like to go with spray cans, please use also the airbrush. Never spray with the spray can direct on the frame. If you have only a little spot, it will end in trouble. So spray the color in the airbrush and from the airbrush on the frame. Let's go. Now we have to do the most difficult step, the clear coat. And that's by far the most difficult step, because when the clear coat is cured, we have an overspray around the repaired area and we have to polish this overspray. And it's much easier to polish a 2K system because it's much harder, much more durable and much more easy to polish. If you want to go with the cheap version, a 1K version, you won't get the same result like a factory paint job or a pro paint job I do for my clients. So what I highly recommend is a 2K clear coat. If you want to go cheap, you can do it, but you won't end with the same glossy and durable result like a 2K clear coat. But if you want to go cheap, that's it. So I recommend the 2K version. Let's spray it again in the airbrush and from the airbrush direct on the frame. Clear coating produces a lot of overspray, so I have to do some masking with masking tape around the repair area to protect the original paint job and the bike. And that's what I'm doing first. And then I can apply the clear coat. It's 24 hours later, the clear coat is cured and I'm still involved in new projects in the background, but what I have to do on the bike is I have to remove the overspray around the fixed area, and to do that I have to do a light sanding, this time with 2000 grit, and then a polish with a cut compound. So what I'm doing is a light sanding around the area I fixed earlier to remove the overspray on the edges. That takes some time and you have to be careful not to damage the surface again, and then we can do the polish. And that is how it should look like after we've done the sanding. No overspray around the fixed area. And for the polish we need an oscillating polishing machine. That means the machine goes a figure 8, not only round and round. If you go only round and round, you will polish holograms in the clear coat, which looks super bad. So an oscillating machine is what you need. And we need, of course, the cut compound I mentioned earlier. So super easy, just apply some of the compound on the area you like to polish. And then let's start. And we are done with the repair. There are no longer chips and scratches on the top tube. Yeah, and that's it. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Goodbye.